Dear students, as you know that the Britishers had come to India in disguise of a merchant trading company. So when they have first arrived in India, nobody had an inclination or any kind of idea that they would go on to capture India or they would go on to consolidate their presence in India. So let us understand that how did this transformation of a East India trading company took shape, and slowly and gradually a company which had come to trade converted itself into a government. So let us understand that how did this progression happen. So this is the story of the time period after the Battle of Plassey, which took place in 1757 and up till the Great Revolt of 1857. So let us see what were the steps and what were the policies taken by East India Company. Mind you, this is the time period when India is governed by East India Company. You cannot say that British people were governing India, because the whole and sole authority of taking decisions was with East India Company, though it was controlled by the British government, but this was the main entity, East India Company. So let us see how did East India Company transform itself into a government. So by the mid 18th century, that means somewhere around 1750s, three early British settlement towns, Madras, Bombay, so today it is called as Mumbai, but back then it was known as Bombay, and Calcutta had grown in size. So you can see that when Britishers had earlier come to India for the first time, they had occupied small pieces of land in Calcutta, Bombay of that time, Mumbai of today, and Madras. So these were known as settlements. So they have started doing all these very early on, during 1620s, during the time of the Emperor Jahangir itself. So by the time 1750s, these small settlements have taken shape of a big towns. So today also you can realize that these three towns are part of the 6 metro towns that India boasts of. So now that means the Britishers had already, captured these 3 major towns. So when we say major towns, so these were back then known as presidencies, and they were governed by British officers known as presidents. So Calcutta presidency does not mean that we were talking only about the town of Calcutta. So presidency actually was like defining the sphere of influence. So Calcutta presidency was free to make rules for all these regions you can see. Bengal was governed by Calcutta presidency. So similarly, Bombay presidency did not mean that the influence or the administration was limited only to Bombay, but that was more like a headquarter. So these 3 towns were acting like headquarters. So what basically the Britishers have done is that they have divided the entire country into 3 zones. So each zone had a headquarter. So till 1750s, they were treated equally by the Britishers. That means Madras presidency, Bombay presidency, and Calcutta presidency, they were almost independent of each other. They were free to do their own politics, make their own rules. But that was to change. So how did all that change? Let's see. The British victory at the Battle of Plassey, which took place in 1757, had made it clear that the intentions of East India Company were to transform itself from a trading company to the rulers of Indian subcontinent. So after the win or victory at Battle of Plassey, everybody had understood that Britishers are not going to leave India soon. They are fighting battles, winning battles one after the other. So their real intention is to become the masters of the territories of India. So that had become very clear. So immediately after this victory, the company took some administrative decisions to consolidate its position and also to expand its footprints in India. So once the British emerged victorious at Battle of Plassey, their confidence was boosted because they now understood that it is very easy to defeat Indian rulers. So now they began thinking of plans, strategies, policies so that they can consolidate their power, because till that time Marathas were the most dominant power of Indian subcontinent. Also, Mughals were not all dead. Mughals were there. They were considered to be the emperor of the country by the common masses. So Britishers have to put on a lot of effort to become the real administrator, real master. So let us see. So just after the victory at Battle of Plassey, so begins the real British rule. So Robert Clive was the hero of British victory at Plassey. So this guy Robert Clive. So Robert Clive was the governor of Bengal during the year 1757 to 60 and also from 1765 to 67. So this guy Robert Clive, who had defeated the Nawab of Bengal. Who was the Nawab of Bengal who got defeated at the Battle of Plassey? Sirajud-Daulah was defeated. So once Sirajud-Daulah was defeated and killed, so what happened after that? Mir Jafar was made the next Nawab. So Mir Jafar was made the Nawab with the help, or you can say with the blessings of Robert Clive. So Robert Clive himself became the governor of Bengal. So he was the governor of Bengal for 2 terms. So first term immediately started after the Battle of Plassey, and he completed his first term after 3 years, and then he went back to London, and then again he came back to India in 1765 and completed his second term of 2 years. So during his first tenure, that means for first 3 years after the Battle of Plassey, he served as Bengal's governor under the Nawab Mir Jafar. So the company's one and only aim was to maximize the revenue at the expense of peasants. So just after the Battle of Plassey, so Mir Jafar was Nawab, Robert Clive was his governor, or you can say the governor of Bengal. So the intention of Robert Clive was to loot Bengal. He wanted to derive as much profit as possible from Bengal. His intention was not to make Bengal beautiful, make it more livable, or help the common poor citizens, but his aim was to maximize the profit of the company, because these people, Robert Clive and all the other British officers, they were hired by East India Company. So hiring used to take place in Britain. So these young people, so they were hardly like 35 years when they became the governor of Bengal. So these people were hired by company and posted in India. So their loyalty was towards their company, not towards India. So Robert Clive wanted to loot, exploit the farmers and peasants so that he can help the company, East India Company, in maximizing the profit. So in an attempt to do that, Robert Clive also amassed great wealth for himself. So though he was working for East India Company, but he was greedy. He kept a large chunk of profit for himself. He did not give the entire amount to the company, for which he was later, some legal cases were done on him by the East India Company, but he won all that. So he gathered a great personal fortune in India and returned to Bengal in the year 1760. So that was his first tenure. For the first time, he remained the governor of Bengal for 3 years. Then he returned back to London. So he came back again to India in the year 1765 as governor and commander-in-chief of Bengal state. So he came back again, but this time he was more powerful because he was given clear instructions that from now on we are not only going to rule, but we are also going to militarily expand. We are going to use military forces to expand our power in India. So this was what happened immediately after the Battle of Plassey. So now let's see what happened when Robert Clive returned to India for the second tenure. For the second time, he came back to India in 1765. So let's see what happened after that. So Robert Clive's second tenure, you can see here Robert Clive. So Clive was sent back to Bengal in 1765 as the governor for the second time. So Clive had spent 5 years in Britain. So meanwhile, the British had won the Battle of Buxar and Mir Jafar had died. So Battle of Plassey took place in 1757. Robert Clive went back to London in 1760. So when he was in London, many significant events have taken place in his absence. He was in London, but that did not mean that nothing was happening in India. So when he was in London, the British had already fought another important battle. So that was Battle of Buxar. So it was fought in 1764. And also Mir Jafar had died. So when he was in London, many significant events had already occurred. The British had won Battle of Buxar and the Nawab Mir Jafar had died. So what was the significance of Battle of Buxar? In Battle of Buxar, the British managed to defeat not only the Nawab of Bengal, but also the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II. So you can say that now Britishers have defeated the Mughals. So Mughals were considered to be the emperor of entire India. So if you are defeating Mughal, so by default you become the next emperor. Your position is superior to the emperor. So all this has already happened when Robert Clive was in London. So now Robert Clive has come back. So what did he do? So Robert Clive signed the Treaty of Allahabad on 12th of August 1765. So Battle of Buxar was won in 1764. Immediately after that, Robert Clive came back to India and he went to meet the defeated Mughal emperor. Who was the defeated Mughal emperor? Shah Alam II. So Shah Alam II was positioned, or you can say asked to leave Delhi, and he was asked to continue his living in Allahabad. So these Mughal emperors, they used to live in either Agra or Delhi. But after the Battle of Buxar, the Mughals wanted them to be removed from the important centers of the country. So he was sent to a not that much significant place. That means he was sent to Allahabad. So Robert Clive went to Allahabad to meet Shah Alam II. What was the purpose of that meeting? They signed the Treaty of Allahabad. So Robert Clive told the emperor that we have managed to defeat you. So now you will have to agree to a few conditions we put before you. So all those conditions were written in Treaty of Allahabad. So what was this Treaty of Allahabad? So it was signed on 12th August. You need not remember date, but year is very important. Just the next year of Battle of Buxar, all this is happening. So what were the terms of the treaty? Nawab of Awadh was forgiven. So in Battle of Buxar, three main people were defeated by British. Nawab of Bengal, similarly Nawab of Awadh, and the Mughal Emperor. They have jointly fought the Battle of Buxar and British defeated them. So now after the defeat of Battle of Buxar, Nawab of Bengal, so Mir Qasim, he was defeated and then he went into oblivion. He went out of the eyes of public. He gave up all his throne because he was already defeated. So nobody heard about him anything after that. So Mir Qasim is out of picture. Nawab of Awadh. So Nawab of Awadh was forgiven and had to pay a war penalty of rupees 53 lakhs. Also, Awadh controlled Allahabad. So Allahabad was actually under the control of the Nawab of Awadh. But now it was given to the Mughal emperor. So all these were terms of the treaty. defeated Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II granted the Diwani rights. So what is Diwani rights? So Diwani rights is the right to govern and collect tax. Today we have district magistrates, we have other kind of officers, agriculture officer, revenue officers. So what is their job? They administer, they govern a district or they govern states. So that was during that time, this governance or this right to govern was known as Diwani rights. So these rights were with the Mughal emperor, but now Mughal emperor is defeated. So Britishers are forcing them that you give us the Diwani right. From today onwards, we will govern. So the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II granted the Britishers the Diwani right. When did it happen? In 1765. So this way, the Diwani rights of Bengal Suba was under the control of Nawab, and the Nawab was under the control of Mughals. But now Mughals are gifting the Diwani rights of Bengal Suba to East India Company. So what was this Bengal Suba? So Bengal Suba of that time consisted of entire Bengal. Entire Bengal means that also included Bangladesh of today and Odisha and Bihar. So that way, for the first time, the Britishers are now becoming the administrators. They officially have the right. So in return, the company would deposit rupees 26 lakhs in Mughal treasury. So now Mughals will not collect the revenue. Mughals will not collect the taxes. Britishers would collect. And out of all the taxes collected, 26 lakhs will be given to the Mughals each year. So Nawab of Bengal retained the judicial functions, but the company had the power to collect revenue. Though Mir Qasim was gone, but Britishers appointed a puppet Nawab. The next Nawab of Bengal was puppet. So what will the Nawab do? Why will he become a Nawab if taxes are to be collected by Britishers only? So some power was left in the hands of Nawab. What were those powers? The judicial functions. That means giving justice, listening to cases, justice, court, judges, all these powers were given to the Nawab because this does not bring profit. Britishers were more interested in profit, making money. So giving justice does not make you rich. So all these powers were given to the Nawab of Bengal. So Britishers said that we will collect money and you just take care of law and order and justice. So this new setup was called as dual system of government. So why this is dual system? Because two sets of people are ruling. One is Nawab, the other is East India Company. So East India Company does two things. It governs and collects taxes. What does the Nawab do? Nawab takes care of law and order and court and justice. So two sets of people are ruling over Bengal. So that's why this system was known as dual system of government. So question is asked, who introduced dual system of government? Answer should be Robert Clive. And how did this all happen? Because of Treaty of Allahabad. So now let us understand this whole system of dual governance. So obviously it started in 1765 when the Treaty of Allahabad was put into effect. It did not continue for too long. It continued only for 7 years. So why did it not continue for too long? We will see. So dual government was introduced by Robert Clive obviously in 1765 and it continued till 1772. In this dual system of government in Bengal, the company had Diwani rights. So you know Diwani rights to collect revenue, and Nizam. So Nizam, Nawab, all these were same positions. So Nizam or Indian chiefs had the power on administrative authority. Administrative authority means police, courts. That means something which is not related to revenue or taxes, not related to money, just to take care of law and order. So this was referred to as Clive's dual system, in which the company was the Diwan. So if you have the Diwani rights, you become the Diwan. So earlier Diwan used to be appointed by the Nawabs or Mughals, but now the company has become the Nawab. Sorry, company has become the Diwan, and Nawab held the Nijamat. Nijam means administration. So you only administer, we will make money. So that was the concept of East India Company. So the Nijamat considered as the territorial jurisdiction of Bengal and remained with the Nawab, but in ground reality the English had a good hold over this power. So though on paper it was said that law and order is the responsibility of Nizam. So what will the people think? People will think that law and order and justice departments are with Nizam. So if there is something wrong with law and order, people will blame the Nawab. They are not going to blame East India Company. But in reality, even the responsibility of maintaining law and order was taken over by the Britishers. So they were doing everything, but the blame and responsibility was passed on to the Nawabs and Nizams. So they were very clever. They were making money, but they were not ready to take any blame on themselves. So why did this dual government fail? So obviously the dual government failed completely. That's why it had to be revoked in 1772. So it was put to end in 1772. But why? Because during this period, corruption and exploitation of the peasants were rampant. Because two sets of people are ruling and citizens are same. So both this group wanted to exploit, make more money for themselves. So this way the common peasants, farmers, they were exploited and corruption was increased. Indian industries were also ruined, because what is the motive of East India Company? East India Company is a company C. So they want more and more profit. So they started doing harm to Indian industries. Their policies were such that Indian goods would become, Indian goods would be sold at higher prices, and East India Company made goods would be sold at cheaper prices, so that people would not buy anything made in India. They would start buying things made by the company. So that way Indian industries were ruined. The company used its political power to ruin the cotton cloth industry in Bengal. So places like Dhaka, they were very famous for muslin silk. Ships from all over the world used to come to Bengal to buy silk and cloth. So this industry was a big threat to East India Company, because East India Company wanted to sell their own clothes in India, but their clothes were not of that good quality. So what they did, they destroyed the cloth industry in Bengal. So if you destroy the cloth industry of Bengal, what will people of India do? They will be forced to buy clothes from you. So all these were the devious plans of the East India Company. So agriculture was also destroyed, because you are increasing taxes, you are exploiting, corruption is there. So common farmers, peasants, they faced great difficulty. Agriculture was destroyed. The peasants were the worst sufferers, and many among them left their lands and became dacoits and robbers. This is true. This has actually happened. So farmers, they have to pay taxes now, taxes to East India Company. Also East India Company has taken their land and given to zamindars. So now farmers don't even have money to eat, don't even have money to feed their family. but still they have to pay taxes. So what will they do? They gave up farming. They said that if we continue farming, we have to pay taxes, and there is no use of doing farming because we can't even feed our families. So they left farming and they became robbers and dacoits. So these dacoits and robbers later on did many revolts against the British Empire. So ultimately, the income of the company also suffered because now farmers are giving up farming. So who is going to pay taxes to the company? Peasants, industry, everything is destroyed. So if everything is destroyed, who is going to pay the taxes? So ultimately, the income of the company also suffered. It could neither get good revenue nor enjoyed better trade. So you can see that dual government was a failure because of corruption, because of exploitation of farmers, and because of closing of Indian industries. So if it is a failure, it got abolished. So dual government was abolished in 1772. Warren Hastings was appointed by the East India Company, EIC. We will be using this for East India Company. So Warren Hastings was appointed by East India Company as the governor of Bengal in 1772. Before that, Robert Clive was continuing his second tenure from 1765 to 1767. So during this tenure, he had started dual government. So some years later, Warren Hastings became the governor of Bengal, and he saw that corruption has increased, agriculture is destroyed, Indian companies or factories are closed. So Warren Hastings had specific orders from the directors of the company to abolish the dual government. So if you have the dual government, so you are sharing the power with Nawab, though on paper, but at least you are sharing power with Nawab. So the company told the new governor that we do not want this kind of arrangement. We don't want this Nawab to have any kind of power. So he was told that now you go to India, become the governor of Bengal, and abolish the dual government. So henceforth, the company took up the responsibility of civil justice, also along with the direct charge of Diwani. So now even the powers given to Nawab was snatched, and only East India Company have the power to rule, administer, to give justice. So now the powers of Nawabs are gone. Now no dual power, single government, only company will rule. The Nawab of Bengal was granted a pension of rupees 16 lakhs annually for his personal expenses. So now Nawab is gone, Nawab is out of scene, only company will rule. So the Regulating Act of 1773. So now the company has become the sole master, no concept of Nawab anymore. So the next major policy decision that the company took was the Regulating Act of 1773. So this Regulating Act was actually passed by the British Parliament, because British Parliament had given permission to East India Company to go to India and do trade. So British Parliament was keeping a close watch on the activities of East India Company. So now they are bringing a Regulating Act. Regulating Act means they want to regulate the working of the East India Company. The governor of Bengal was made the Governor General of Bengal. Please remember this fact. Till now, the in charge of Bengal or the biggest officer of Bengal was known by the title Governor. But now his title is changed. He is made even bigger. He is now the Governor General. All the powers. So the use of general means all the powers are with him. So you will see general manager. Today also you will go to bank or any company, you will see there is a post known as general manager and there is a post known as manager. So general manager is above or higher position than manager. So similarly governor and governor general. So governor general means you are more powerful. So Warren Hastings, who was governor of Bengal till then, became the first governor general because of this regulating act. Till 1772, he was just the governor. But as soon as this regulating act was passed on, the governor was made the governor general of Bengal. So question is asked, who was the first governor general of Bengal? People say Robert Clive. No, answer is not Robert Clive. Answer is Warren Hastings. So what will the governor general do? So governor general was to be assisted by 4 people. So this group of 4 plus 1 people became the Governor General's Executive Council. So governor alone cannot take all decisions. So there was a governor and there were 4 people to advise him. So this set of 5 persons became the government. They were the government. They were governing the Bengal. So just imagine only 5 people. Today in a government there are more than 50-60 ministers. Somebody takes care of agriculture, somebody takes care of road, somebody takes care of water. But that time only 5 people became the government, and this government, this structure which consisted of 1 governor general and 4 advisors came to be known as Governor General's Executive Council. Also, a Supreme Court was established in Calcutta in 1774. So Supreme Court was first established in Calcutta. Today our Supreme Court is located at Delhi because Delhi is the capital of India. But during those times, Calcutta was the most prominent city of British settlements. So that's why Supreme Court got established there itself. So now company has been regulated or has been started to get regulated by the British Parliament. So the first act was in 1773. So 11 years after that, another significant act known as Pitt's India Act. You have to by heart all these acts and years because these questions have been asked so many times I can't tell you. So what was this Pitt's India Act? Through this act, the company became subordinate to the British government. So subordinate to the British government means earlier company was free to take its own decisions, but now they will have to take permissions for everything from the British Parliament. For political matters, the Board of Control was created, and for commercial affairs, the Court of Directors was appointed. So all this was happening in Britain, not on Indian soil. So company was located in India, company was doing its trade in India. So Britain was concerned that how is this company working. So now in Britain, 2 separate entities got created. The first entity or the first you can say organization was Board of Control. So what was Board of Control? So Board of Control was to govern the commercial affairs, for the political affairs. That means you are going to fight in Battle of Plassey or you are going to fight in Battle of Buxar. You have to take permission from British government. You cannot fight like that only. Or if you want to expand your territory. So all these are political decisions. So all these political decisions were taken care of by the Board of Control. Now company cannot decide everything on its own. So British Parliament will also interfere. So that was happening through Pitt's India Act. So 2 entities got created, Board of Control and the Court of Directors. So Court of Directors were a group of merchants. So they were also having their chamber in London only. So this court of directors, they were more like businessmen. So they were interested in the commercial activities of the companies, like establishing industries, destroying Indian industries and all that stuff. So in this dual system of control, the company was represented by the court of directors, because court of directors basically meant businessmen. So these were the businessmen who had invested the money in East India Company. So court of director was the voice of the company, whereas the voice of the British government was board of control. So now company is controlled by two entities. One is board of control, which is actually the representative of British government. The other is court of directors. So question has been asked, through which act court of directors and board of control was created? The answer would be Pitt's India Act of 1784. The Governor General's Council's strength was reduced to 3 members. So earlier the setup was 1 plus 4. One was the Governor General and he had 4 advisors. But now Pitt's India Act want to reduce from 4 only 3 advisors. And one of the 3 advisors would be Commander-in-Chief of the British Crown's Army in India. So now the government contains only 4 decision makers, one of which is the Governor General, and 3 advisors. So out of these 3 advisors, one was the Army Chief. You can say in today's term, he was the Commander-in-Chief. So through this act, the company became subordinate to British government. So you can see very clearly that government interference or the interference of British Parliament increased too much into the affairs of the East India Company. The presidencies of Madras and Bombay became subordinate to the Bengal presidency. Very important. So up till then, Madras, Bombay and Calcutta, they were given equal treatment by the East India Company. But now Bengal has become the most important. So it was said that now Calcutta will have authority over the other 2 presidencies as well. That means these 2 will have governor. Bombay will have governor, but Calcutta will have Governor General. So Governor General is more powerful than governor. So obviously the governors of Madras and Bombay, they came under the control of Governor General of Calcutta. Also, because of this move, it had become very clear that Calcutta is the most important possession or most important territory of British India. So Calcutta became the capital of British possessions in India. So for the first time, the term British possessions in India was used. British, not East India Company. Because now British Parliament is getting involved. So you have to remember all this was happening during Pitt's India Act. So this act gave the British government direct control over Indian administration. So now you can understand, up till now everything was done in the name of company, but now British government has involved themselves. So from now on you can say that Britain as a country has started ruling India. So all these acts were passed. Now Britishers have decided that Bengal is their most important territory. So what were the administrative changes that they brought to Bengal? The most important was the permanent settlement of Bengal. So what is meant by permanent settlement? So permanent settlement of revenue collection. So who is going to collect revenue? Who is going to give it to British? So this question was settled permanently. So the permanent settlement of Bengal was brought into effect by the Governor General Lord Cornwallis. So all these are $1 million questions asked many times. So permanent settlement of Bengal was introduced by Lord Cornwallis. He was the Governor General of Bengal. So this was basically an agreement between the company and the zamindars to fix the land revenue. So what did this Britishers do? So they divided the land of Bengal into small territories and gave them to zamindars. So these lands basically belong to farmers and peasants. So these lands were taken over by the Britishers and given it to a new class of people known as zamindars. So this scheme was centered around creating a new class. So till then, zamindar, the concept of zamindar was not that much into practice, was not that much into fashion, but now it is done officially. It has the permission of the company. So the company appointed some people as zamindars, and these zamindars were told that this land now belongs to you, but in return you have to collect the taxes from this land and give it to the East India Company. So these zamindars were landlords who were the permanent masters. That's why it is known as permanent settlement. It was not that zamindar will be replaced after every 5 years or 10 years. It was not like a job. This land is given to you for once and all. So these zamindars, they collected revenue from the farmers and looked after their interest. So in a way you can say there was East India Company. So under East India Company there were many zamindars. So under a single zamindar there was a huge land, and on that land lived thousands of farmers. So these farmers became like personal properties of zamindars. So farmers, their families, their lands, so everything was under the control and influence of the zamindars, whereas the zamindars themselves were controlled by the East India Company. So this is known as permanent settlement. So this system was also known as zamindari system. The zamindars proprietorship, that means ownership over the land, because these lands were given to zamindars by British people. So the zamindars would stay with, or the ownership of the land would stay with them as long as they paid the fixed revenue at the said date to the government, because government or East India Company had told them that you have to pay monthly revenue to us. Otherwise, we will take your land if you do not pay us. So if they failed to pay, their rights would cease to exist and the land would be auctioned off. The amount to be paid by the landlords was fixed. So the British had fixed it. Everything was permanent, fixed. So it was agreed that this would not increase in future. So that's why it was permanent. So what was this fixed amount? The fixed amount was 10 by 11 portion of the revenue for the government, and 1/10 was, it should be 1/11th, and 1/11th was for the zamindar. So it means if you have collected a revenue of, let's say, 11,000 rupees. So divide 11,000 rupees into 11 parts. So divide this into 11 parts. Keep one part with yourself. I mean, zamindar will keep one part with himself and give remaining 10 parts to the British treasury. So this was the role of zamindar. So now company will not go to farmers and will tell them that you have to pay taxes. Zamindar will do that. So you can see slowly, gradually, East India Company, which was a company, is now becoming or behaving like a government. The zamindar also had to give a tenant a patta, because under zamindars there was a huge territory of land, and on those lands farmers used to do farming. So all these farmers are responsibility of zamindar. So one particular farmer works under a particular zamindar. So the zamindars have to keep record of that which farmers are under my control. So the zamindar used to give the tenant or the farmers a patta, which was like an identity card which described the area of land given to him and the rent he had to pay to the landlords. Because actually these farmers were paying taxes to Jamindars and Jamindar was giving it to East India Company. So it had to be ensured that farmers are given proper identity card, they have their records are maintained. The next major step was subsidiary alliance. So subsidiary alliance was basically, you know what these Britishers used to do? During those times, there were many princely states. So these Britishers told the kings and queens of these princely states that we want you to sign subsidiary alliance. Alliance means partnership. Subsidiary means you have to give subsidy. So as per this alliance, the Indian kings or the princely states have to disband their own army. So each princely state had their own army. But now East India Company thinks that they are the master of the whole country. So what is the purpose of this army? Why will the princely states keep this army when East India Company is the master of whole country? So East India Company used to tell them that you remove this army from your kingdom, we will place our own British army in your kingdom. You have to pay for their food, for their lodging. You have to take care of every expenditure of the British army. That means your army should be completely dismantled. So think from the point of view of princely states. So princely states became totally dependent on Britishers. So this was the concept of subsidiary alliance. So subsidiary alliance was basically a treaty between the British East India Company and the Indian princely states, by virtue of which the Indian kingdoms lost their sovereignty to the English. So if you have no army of your own, that means you cannot defend yourself. You have lost your power, you have lost your authority, and now you are completely dependent on whims and fancies of the East India Company. So it was a major process that led to the building of British Empire in India. So that way, one after the other, the princely states used to lose their power and significance, and British used to capture that. It was just like capturing. So it was framed by Lord Wellesley, very important. Subsidiary alliance, Lord Wellesley. Dual government, Lord Clive. So you have to remember all this. First Governor General of Bengal, Warren Hastings. So subsidiary alliance was introduced by Lord Wellesley. Who was he? He was the Governor General of India. So Governor General of Bengal is also the Governor General of India technically. So Governor General of India from 1798 to 1805. So this policy of subsidiary alliance, though it was used by Lord Wellesley, but the first person to propagate this was the French East India Company. Even before the Britishers, the French East India Company had come up with this plan, but they could not enforce this. So who is credited with coming up with the plan of subsidiary alliance? His name is Dupleix, Marquis Dupleix. But question is asked, who introduced this? It was put into practice by Lord Wellesley. French cannot put this into practice. Even before that, they were defeated by the British. So an Indian ruler entering into subsidiary alliance with the British had to dissolve his own armed forces and accept British forces in his territory. So he had also to pay for the British army's maintenance. So this is known as subsidy. So army is of British, but who will be paying? The local princes will be paying. So is this fair? This is totally unfair. Army is of British and expenditure will be taken care of by the princely state. So this is known as giving subsidy. In return, the British would protect the Indian states against any foreign attack or internal revolt. So the logic given by the Britishers was that we are keeping an army in your state because in case somebody attacks your state or your own people want to remove you from the throne, our British army will come to your rescue. So that was the logic given by the British. The Indian rulers that way lost all their powers in respect of foreign affairs and military, because it was now the commander or military general of this army who had greater control over the princely state, and these army people started to take decisions that whether a princely state should attack another state, should become friends with neighboring states or not. So basically the Indian ruler lost all their powers, and these princely states, they became mere British protectorate. That means they were under the protection of British. Now you have to remember this very important key fact. Who was the first person to accept a subsidiary alliance? The Nizam of Hyderabad was the first person who accepted this policy, because he was under force. He could not match the power of the Britishers. The Britishers have already defeated Mysore, they have already defeated Marathas. So the Nizam of Hyderabad knew that if he says no, his territory will also be taken over. So that's why he agreed to enter into the subsidiary alliance. So the first state to accept subsidiary alliance was the state of Hyderabad, and this happened in 1798. So what happened once the Nizam of Hyderabad signed this? So the Nizam could not form any alliance with the French and also with the Maratha without British consent. Do you think the British would say yes? So it means once you sign subsidiary alliance, your decision making power, you cannot take decisions, you cannot take political decisions. For everything you will have to take permission from the British government. So first state was Hyderabad. The second state to fall was Mysore, immediately after Tipu Sultan's death. So even when Tipu Sultan was alive, the Britishers, Lord Wellesley, used to put a lot of pressure on him to accept this subsidiary alliance treaty, but he said no. That's why fourth battle of Mysore took place and he was killed. So after Tipu Sultan was killed, Mysore also accepted the subsidiary alliance. Lord Wellesley compelled the Nawab of Awadh to accept the policy of subsidiary alliance in 1801. So all these were big and important princely states: Awadh, Hyderabad, Mysore. So now you can get a clear picture how a company became a government. So Lord Wellesley compelled the Nawab of Awadh in 1801. So first state was Hyderabad, then Mysore, then Awadh. Awadh means the region of Lucknow. Lucknow was the capital of Awadh. So Awadh basically meant Lucknow, Faizabad, all that regions. So in 1802, Peshwa Baji Rao II, who was Peshwa Baji Rao II? He was the Prime Minister of Marathas. Prime Minister of Marathas. So Peshwa Baji Rao II and many Maratha states like Bhosle and Sindhia also accepted the policies. So gradually, one after the other, the princely states are surrendering their integrity and sovereignty before East India Company. So now next important policy decision was the Charter Act of 1833. The Charter Act of 1833 was passed by British Parliament. So it ended the activities of the company as a commercial body. So earlier during Pitt's Act, what had the British government done? British government have taken control of all the political decisions and only commercial decisions were allowed by Board of Directors. Board of Directors. Here it was Board of Control. So that had already happened in 1784 with the introduction of Pitt's Act. But now almost 50 years later, Charter Act of 1833 snatches even the commercial powers from the company. So it ended the activities of the company as commercial body, and it was made a purely administrative body. With this, British were allowed to settle free in India. So now the British Parliament says that now you are not a company. You are full-scale administrative setup. So don't call yourself a company anymore. That means don't think of yourself as simply a company, but you have the entire administrative setup. So basically, it actually in real terms, it meant that all the powers were taken up by British Parliament. So if British Parliament have become the masters of the company now, so what will the British Parliament say? So now British Parliament are saying that rule of East India Company is almost over. Now we are becoming an administrative setup. So after this policy change, the British people were allowed to settle freely in India. Earlier, what was happening? East India Company was taking exams in London, selecting officers, sending them to India to do business. But now the British Parliament says that we are not merely company, we are whole government, and India is our possession, British possessions. So if in part of India has become British possessions, so let's allow British citizens to settle freely in India. The Governor General of Bengal was made the Governor General of India. So now, as per the Charter Act, they are the government of India. East India Company is gone. Now British Parliament is thinking of themselves as government of India. So now Governor General of Bengal is changed into Governor General of India. Now expansion is complete. They are not only limited in Bengal, Madras, Bombay. They are masters of entire India. So let's call it Governor General of India. So the first Governor General of India was William Bentinck. So William Bentinck was given the legislative power over entire India, not only Bengal, including the governors of Bombay and Madras. So this is how company is gone and British Parliament has taken up all the powers. The company lost the status of a commercial body and was made purely an administrative body. This act was the first law to distinguish between the executive and the legislative power of Governor General. So what is meant by executive and what is meant by legislative power? So if you think of government, government does two kind of things. So government makes laws. So making laws is known as legislative power. You can make a new law. So that is known as legislative power. What is known as executive power? So executive power means day-to-day governance. Already some laws are there. So what does these executives do? They simply put those laws into practice. That means day-to-day governance based on the established law. So that is executive power. So distinction was made that these two are different things. Making law is a separate issue and governing, executive means you don't make laws, but you have to see that laws are not broken. So that is executive. So all these powers were with Governor General, but at least it was made clear that these two are different functions. So if these two are different functions, so what was the need to show them as different functions? Because a fourth member was introduced who could only discuss and vote on legislative matters. So it was in a way to signal that making laws is a separate function. So that's why a fourth member could discuss only law-making procedures and vote only on legislative matters. So Council of India now becomes, earlier it was one governor general plus 3 members. Now the 4th member has been added. So 4th member was also called the law member. Why? Because his role was limited to the law making process. The first such law member was Lord Macaulay. This Council of India was to a certain extent the legislature. So strength of the executive remained 3+1 only, because the 4th member was the law member. He was not the executive. So you have to remember who was the first law member of Council of India, Lord Macaulay. So let us see a few things about Lord Macaulay. So Lord Macaulay is famous in Indian history because of his education policy that he introduced in 1835. Though he was a law member, but he was also a educationist. So he helped the British in drafting the education policy of 1835. The passing of Charter Act of 1833 was led by appointment of Lord Macaulay as first law member of Governor General's Council. So he served from 1834 to 1838 and ensured that English language is imposed on India. So this was his education policy, that if you want to rule over India, convert Indians into Englishmen. So how will that happen? So teach them in English language. So in 1835, the education policy of Lord Macaulay was published, which was titled Minute on Indian Education. So you have to remember two things. Who was the author of Minute on Indian Education? Lord Macaulay. Year was 1835. So these questions are important. Rest you can overlook. So what was this Minute of Indian Education? It was basically his policy in which he said that let's educate Indians in English language. So if you educate them in English language, it will become easy for them to understand the European scientific, historical and literary education. So whatever we are teaching in Europe, we would teach the same to Indian people. But before that, they have to learn English language, na? So English was introduced as a medium of instruction from class 6th onwards. So Lord Macaulay expressed that his dream was to create a class of persons who were Indian in blood and color, but English in taste. That means his aim was to transform an ordinary Indian into a Englishman who thinks like English. So that if he thinks like an Englishman, he starts loving the British rule. He becomes sympathetic towards British rule. He forgets about the sufferings of his own country. He becomes a Britisher from his opinion. So that is how, they actually managed to rule India for so long. The next important development on the policy front was the doctrine of lapse, and this doctrine of lapse is said to be the most important reason for the revolt of 1857. So let's see what was the problem. The doctrine of lapse was an annexation policy followed widely by Lord Dalhousie. So whenever you see a policy, you have to remember that who introduced that policy and in which year. So doctrine of lapse was introduced by Lord Dalhousie. Who was Lord Dalhousie? He was the Governor General of India. So what was this doctrine? So this doctrine said that if any princely state, if any king does not have a natural son, so even if he adopts somebody, so that adopted son cannot take his place as the next king. So if you die, if a king dies and king does not have a real son, his territory will be taken under control of the British setup. So adopted sons will not be given pension. Adopted sons will not be made rulers. So this is known as doctrine of lapse. If you do not produce a son, your territory will lapse. So the doctrine of lapse is said to be the underlying factors that led to the revolt of 1857. So even the adopted sons were not given pension. So you have to. The reason given was that the adopted son have, or you can say the adopted son have the right only on the personal properties of his father, personal property. But state or princely states are not personal properties. So that's why adopted son will neither be given a pension, will nor be made kings. So it was as per this policy that Nana Sahib, the adopted son of Maratha Peshwa Bajirao II, was denied his titles and pension. Why? Because he was adopted son. So all these people later on supported the revolt of 1857. Lord Dalhousie, who had introduced this doctrine of lapse, is blamed for revolt of 1857. These were strong leaders, and now they are removed from their positions because they are adopted. So that created a lot of resentment. So you have to have a look at this list. The most important question that may be asked is, or have been asked is, which was the first state to be annexed using the doctrine of lapse? It was the state of Satara in Maharashtra. You can see that state of Jhansi was also annexed using this. So you must have heard the name of Rani Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi. So Rani, we will study in great detail when we will be covering the revolt of 1857. So Rani Lakshmi of Jhansi Bai, so when her husband died, so her husband and she did not have a son. So because of doctrine of lapse, Jhansi was also taken over by British government. So because of this, strong political leaders like Nana Sahib and Rani Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi, they stood against this policy and participated in the revolt of 1857. So this was pretty much the story of the company converting itself slowly and gradually into a government. So if you think in terms of the effect of doctrine of lapse, it had some disastrous effect, because Awadh was also annexed under the terms of doctrine of lapse. So it was finally annexed on the grounds of internal misrule. So Awadh was earlier under subsidiary alliance, but even subsidiary alliance means that king is there, king is not removed. But in 1856, king was removed because it was said that the king was not capable of ruling Awadh properly. So all these things was taking place under doctrine of lapse. So I already told you about Nana Sahib and Rani of Jhansi. So likewise, there were many other kings and princes who were unhappy with this. And finally, they lent support to the revolt of 1857. So Dalhousie returned to Britain in 1856, and next year, that is in 1857, a revolt occurred. So Lord Dalhousie is said to be responsible to a great extent for creating this havoc, creating this fear amongst the princes and kings just by introducing doctrine of lapse. So after the Indian revolt broke out in 1857, his governance, whose governance? Dalhousie's governance, was widely criticized as one of the causes of the rebellion.